When Lost in Space first aired in 1965, it looked like a harmless, family-friendly science fiction adventure. Every week, viewers tuned in to see the Robinson family travel across the galaxy with their trusty robot and the ever-devious Dr. Smith. It was colorful, campy, and wildly imaginative, exactly the kind of escapism television audiences craved in the 1960s. But behind the playful stories and futuristic sets was a world very different from the one fans imagined. Cast feuds, dangerous stunts, low budgets, and shocking production choices plagued the series from start to finish. For years, these secrets were hidden, glossed over in reruns and nostalgia. Yet, as the decades passed, members of the cast began to talk, and what they revealed shocked even die-hard fans. Here are 10 secrets Lost in Space producers never wanted you to know, and today we'll uncover the first 4. Secret number 1. The show was never meant to be so campy. If you watch the first few episodes of Lost in Space, you'll notice a darker, more serious tone. That's because Irwin Allen, the producer, originally envisioned the series as a dramatic survival story about a family stranded in the vastness of space. The original pilot episode, No Place to Hide, had no Dr. Smith, no comical robot antics, and certainly none of the campy humor that later defined the series. Instead, it was closer to Swiss Family Robinson in space, a straightforward tale of a family's determination to survive in a hostile environment. The stakes were higher, the danger was more real, and the show leaned heavily on the novelty of outer space adventure. So what happened? The producers quickly realized that television in the 1960s wasn't ready for a fully serious science fiction drama. The ratings were decent, but executives wanted something broader, more entertaining for children and families. As a result, Allen added Dr. Zachary Smith, played by Jonathan Harris, as a saboteur and comic villain. The robot's witty one-liners followed soon after. The result was a tonal shift that left the cast divided. Some actors, like Guy Williams, Professor Robinson, wanted the show to stay serious. Others embraced the new comedic approach. The producers, meanwhile, leaned hard into camp because it sold toys, boosted ratings, and made the series stand out from more cerebral competitors like Star Trek. This shift created tension behind the scenes. While audiences came to love the eccentricities of Dr. Smith and the robot, several cast members felt betrayed, convinced the producers had turned a groundbreaking concept into little more than space-themed slapstick. Secret number 2. Guy Williams felt overshadowed by Dr. Smith. Guy Williams, who played Professor John Robinson, had been hired as the show's leading man. Tall, handsome, and heroic, he was meant to be the anchor of the Robinson family, the father figure who guided them through danger and kept the crew together. For the first season, he filled that role, but as Dr. Smith and the robot became breakout stars, Williams saw his role shrink dramatically. By the second and third seasons, many episodes revolved almost entirely around the trio of Smith, the robot, and young Will Robinson, Billy Mumy. Professor Robinson, once the star, became little more than a background character. Williams reportedly grew frustrated, feeling cheated out of the spotlight. He had left a successful role in Disney's Zorro to take Lost in Space, expecting a heroic lead. Instead, he was pushed to the sidelines while Jonathan Harris improvised witty insults and stole scenes. The producers defended the shift, arguing that audiences loved Dr. Smith and that his antics kept ratings high. But to Williams, it was an insult. His relationship with Harris soured, and though he remained professional on set, he never fully forgave the producers for sidelining him. After Lost in Space ended, Williams largely retreated from Hollywood, eventually moving to Argentina, where he lived a quieter life until his death in 1989. This secret highlights how the producers prioritized ratings over cast morale, a decision that left long-lasting scars. Secret number 3. Jonathan Harris rewrote his character. Jonathan Harris, who played Dr. Smith, is remembered as the most iconic figure of Lost in Space. With his over-the-top mannerisms, flamboyant insults, "You bubble-headed booby," and endless cowardice, he became the show's comedic center. But what most fans don't know is that Dr. Smith was never meant to be funny. Originally, the character was written as a ruthless spy and saboteur. In the pilot episode, Smith sabotages the Robinson ship and nearly kills them. He was meant to die early in the series, serving as a cautionary tale about betrayal. Harris, however, had other ideas. Realizing the role was limited, he began to improvise lines, exaggerate his delivery, and inject humor into scenes. His ad-libs, often delivered directly at the robot, delighted producers and audiences alike. Soon, scripts were rewritten to keep him alive, and Dr. Smith became a permanent fixture. While this decision saved Harris's career and gave the show its most memorable character, it also created resentment. Castmates like Williams and June Lockhart, Maureen Robinson, felt their serious performances were undermined by Harris's camp. For them, the series lost credibility as science fiction. For Harris, it was survival, a way to turn a disposable role into a career-defining one. Behind the scenes, Harris knew he had leverage. He once admitted that he deliberately made Dr. Smith indispensable, so producers couldn't kill him off. In his own words, "I made myself essential." It worked, but it left tension among the cast that never fully healed. Secret number 4. The budget was shockingly low, and Dangerous Though Lost in Space looked futuristic on TV screens. The truth behind the sets and special effects was much grimmer. The show's budget was shockingly low, especially compared to competitors like Star Trek. Producers cut corners wherever they could, sometimes in ways that put cast members at risk. Sets were reused constantly. Planets that looked exotic on screen were often the same soundstage redressed with new props. Costumes were recycled from other 20th Century Fox productions, including old sci-fi movies. Even the robot's design, though iconic, was expensive to maintain, and corners were cut in its upkeep. More troubling were the stunts. Cast members performed many of their own action scenes with little safety oversight. Billy Mooney, only a child at the time, later admitted that some of the stunts were downright dangerous. Explosions were set off close to actors, wires were unreliable, and the protective gear was minimal. Injuries were narrowly avoided on more than one occasion. The low budget also meant that special effects often looked cheap, even by 1960s standards. Monsters were usually actors in rubber suits, and laser beams were added with crude editing techniques. Critics mocked the show's cardboard look, but the producers didn't care. Ratings were high enough to justify the shortcuts. For the cast, however, it was frustrating. They worked long hours under grueling conditions, often with little reward beyond their weekly paycheck. In retrospect, it's remarkable the show lasted 3 seasons at all, considering how underfunded and chaotic the production really was. Secret number 5. The feud between Jonathan Harris and the rest of the cast. By the second season, Lost in Space had become less about the Robinson family's survival and more about the antics of Dr. Smith, the robot, and young Will Robinson. This creative pivot boosted ratings, but it also fractured the cast. While audiences loved Jonathan Harris's flamboyant performance, many of his co-stars did not. Guy Williams, Professor Robinson, was the most vocal. Hired as the leading man, he saw his role reduced to little more than standing in the background, while Harris dominated the screen. For Williams, the shift was humiliating. He had built a career on heroic roles, most famously Disney's Zorro, only to be sidelined on a show where he was supposed to be the star. June Lockhart, Maureen Robinson, and Mark Goddard, Major Don West, also grew frustrated. Their characters, initially meant to have depth and agency, became little more than supporting players. Lockhart once quipped in interviews that the Robinson parents were written as space furniture, there mainly to react to Dr. Smith's schemes. Goddard was even harsher, admitting that he resented Harris for stealing the spotlight and resented the producers for allowing it. Billy Mooney, who played Will Robinson, was in a more complicated position. As a child actor, he benefited from the focus on Will Smith and the robot, yet even he later admitted that the show's dynamic created tension. He respected Harris's talent, but acknowledged that his improvisations often alienated the rest of the cast. Harris himself was unapologetic. He knew he had rewritten the destiny of his character. Originally meant to be killed off, Dr. Smith became indispensable thanks to Harris's creativity and wit. In interviews, he admitted that he deliberately exaggerated his lines and stole scenes because he wanted job security. For him, survival in Hollywood meant making himself the center of attention. The result was a Cold War on set. Cast members remained professional, but the camaraderie one might expect from a family show was largely absent. For years, fans assumed the Robinsons were a close-knit cast. In truth, resentment simmered just beneath the surface, and some wounds never healed. Secret number 6. The robot nearly didn't survive. Few elements of Lost in Space are as iconic as the robot. With its bubble head, accordion arms, and unforgettable catchphrase, "Danger, Will Robinson," It became a pop culture symbol that outlived the show itself. But what most fans don't know is that the robot was nearly scrapped altogether. In the original pilot, the robot was little more than a background machine. Producers considered cutting it entirely because of the cost of building and operating the suit. Every movement required coordination between Bob May, the actor inside, and Dick Tufeld, who provided the robot's booming voice. It was clunky, expensive, and technically challenging. Yet, as the show evolved, the robot became essential. Its sarcastic one-liners, often directed at Dr. Smith, provided humor, while its mechanical strength often saved the Robinsons from danger. The chemistry between Harris and the robot was undeniable, creating a comedic duo that rivaled anything else on television at the time. Behind the scenes, however, the robot was a nightmare. Bob May endured grueling hours inside the heavy suit, often in sweltering heat under studio lights. He could barely see, struggled to breathe, and suffered injuries from repeated falls. Crew members had to constantly repair the fragile design, which broke down frequently. Despite these challenges, the robot became a fan favorite. Letters poured in from viewers who adored the machine's loyalty to Will and its witty insults toward Dr. Smith. The producers, seeing its popularity, gave it more lines and more screen time, but not everyone was pleased. Guy Williams and June Lockhart reportedly felt sidelined yet again, this time not just by Dr. Smith, but by a machine. As the series leaned harder into the Smith-Will robot triangle, the rest of the cast felt increasingly irrelevant. Ironically, the very character the producers nearly abandoned became one of the most enduring symbols of Lost in Space. To this day, Danger Will Robinson remains one of the most quoted lines in television history. Secret number 7. The show's cancellation was more complicated than fans realize. When Lost in Space was canceled in 1968, after 3 seasons, many fans assumed it was simply due to declining ratings. While ratings did play a role, the truth was far more complicated, involving network politics, financial struggles, and competition from another iconic sci-fi show, Star Trek. By the 3rd season, Lost in Space had begun to falter creatively. The campy tone that once drew viewers was starting to wear thin. Episodes grew increasingly bizarre, featuring outlandish monsters in rubber suits, recycled plots, and surreal storylines. While children still enjoyed the spectacle, adult audiences were losing patience. At the same time, Star Trek, which had premiered in 1966, was gaining traction. Though its ratings were modest, it attracted a loyal fan base and critical praise for its mature storytelling and social commentary. Compared to Star Trek, Lost in Space looked childish. CBS, the network airing Lost in Space, began to worry that the show could no longer compete in the evolving sci-fi landscape. Budget issues also plagued the production. By season 3, costs had ballooned, and CBS executives questioned whether the series was worth the investment. Irwin Allen, the producer, was already shifting his attention to other projects, including Land of the Giants. Without Allen's full commitment, Lost in Space lost its strongest advocate. The decision to cancel was influenced by another factor: syndication. In the 1960s, a show needed at least 3 seasons to be viable for reruns. By 1968, Lost in Space had reached that threshold. With 83 episodes in the can, CBS felt confident the series could live on in syndication without the expense of producing new episodes. For the cast, the cancellation came as a shock. Many believed the series would continue, given its popularity with children. Guy Williams, in particular, was bitter. He had already endured being overshadowed by Harris, and now the show ended just as he hoped his role might expand again. In retrospect, the cancellation may have been inevitable. Television was changing, and Lost in Space no longer fit the mood of the late 1960s. But for fans who grew up watching, the ending felt abrupt, leaving the Robinson family stranded forever, a symbol of potential unfulfilled. Secret number 8. Typecasting haunted the cast for decades. For many fans, Lost in Space became timeless, replayed in syndication across generations. But for the actors who starred in it, the legacy was far more complicated. The very show that made them famous also trapped them, overshadowing their later careers. Billy Mooney, who played Will Robinson, was the most candid about this burden. A talented child actor with credits on The Twilight Zone and other series, he found himself forever linked to the role of the boy genius lost among the stars. Casting directors saw him as the kid from Lost in Space, making it difficult to transition transition into more mature roles. Though he later reinvented himself as a musician and writer, he admitted that escaping the shadow of Will Robinson was a lifelong struggle. Mark Goddard, who played Major Don West, faced similar challenges. A gifted actor with a natural toughness, he hoped Lost in Space would propel him into a career as a leading man. Instead, his association with the often ridiculed show limited his opportunities. He later turned to teaching, training young actors, and occasionally reprising his role in fan projects, but he never achieved the stardom he once envisioned. Even Guy Williams, the show's supposed lead, felt the sting of typecasting. Before Lost in Space, he had already been pigeonholed as Zorro, a role that made him beloved but also limited his opportunities. With Lost in Space, he was again boxed in as the stoic father figure. Disillusioned with Hollywood, he eventually moved to Argentina, where he embraced local fame but largely abandoned American television. Jonathan Harris, ironically, benefited the most, but even he was typecast. His flamboyant portrayal of Dr. Smith made him unforgettable, but it also made it nearly impossible for audiences to see him as anything else. He leaned into it, later voicing animated characters that echoed Smith's campy villainy, but he too admitted that Hollywood rarely offered him roles outside that narrow mold. For the cast, the secret producers tried to hide was this. While Lost in Space gave them fame, it also trapped them in roles they could never fully escape. The Robinsons remained lost not only in space, but in the Hollywood machine. Secret number 9. The cast felt exploited in syndication. When Lost in Space was canceled in 1968, it had just enough episodes to qualify for syndication. 83 in total. This was no accident. Producers knew that reruns could generate profit for decades, and they were right. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Lost in Space aired on local stations across America, becoming a nostalgic favorite for children who weren't even alive when it first aired. But the financial windfall went almost entirely to the producers and networks. The cast saw little, if any, compensation for the endless reruns. Residuals, especially in the 1960s, were poorly structured. Actors received small payments for the first few reruns, but nothing like the royalties earned by modern performers. Billy Mooney later revealed his frustration. He noted that Lost in Space had made millions for 20th Century Fox over the years, but the actors themselves did not share in that success. For child actors like Mooney, the imbalance was particularly glaring. His face was broadcast into millions of homes, but his financial benefit was minimal. Mark Goddard echoed this sentiment, describing syndication as both a blessing and a curse. It kept the show alive and maintained their visibility, but it also reminded them of how little they had gained compared to the profits generated. June Lockhart, too, admitted that while she loved the fans, she wished the financial arrangements had been fairer. The producers, of course, stayed silent. To them, syndication was the goal all along. In fact, insiders later revealed that the decision to cancel the show after 3 seasons was deliberate, timed to secure just enough episodes for a profitable rerun package without spending more money on production. This secret stung for decades. Fans adored the reruns, unaware that the smiling cast on screen felt exploited by the very system that made the show immortal. Secret number 10. The reunion projects revealed old wounds. By the 1980s and 1990s, Lost in Space had achieved cult status. Nostalgia was booming, and producers saw opportunities to cash in. Reunion specials, conventions, and even attempts at reboots began to surface. But these projects often revealed just how fractured the cast relationships remained. In 1998, Hollywood released a big-budget Lost in Space movie starring William Hurt, Matt LeBlanc, and Gary Oldman. While it was meant to revive the franchise, most fans found it underwhelming. The original cast was largely sidelined, offered cameo appearances at best. Some, like June Lockhart, embraced the nostalgia. Others, like Mooney, criticized the film for missing the heart of the original. Behind the scenes, lingering bitterness between cast members resurfaced. Guy Williams had already passed away by then, but others still carried resentment over how their roles had been diminished during the original run. Jonathan Harris, though beloved by fans, remained a polarizing figure among his peers. Some appreciated his brilliance, while others never forgave him for dominating the show. The most telling sign of old wounds came during conventions. Fans who expected a close-knit family were often surprised to learn of the real divisions. Cast members sometimes avoided one another, keeping interactions polite but distant. Billy Mumy, however, played a unique role in keeping the legacy alive. He embraced the fan community, co-wrote books about the series, and participated in documentaries that told the behind-the-scenes story honestly. His willingness to speak candidly about the tensions gave fans a clearer picture of the truth, that the Robinsons were a family on screen, but not always off it. The most successful revival came with Netflix's 2018 reboot, a darker, more modern take on the Robinson story. While the new series introduced the franchise to a new generation, it also reminded fans of the original's complicated legacy. For the surviving cast, it was bittersweet, proof that the concept still had power, but also a reminder of how their own time in the spotlight had been marred by conflict and compromise. The final secret, then, is that even decades later, Lost in Space remained haunted by its past. The reunion projects may have celebrated the show, but they also exposed the scars left behind, scars that never fully healed. Lost in Space may have looked like lighthearted science fiction for the whole family, but the truth behind the cameras told a very different story. Feuds, exploitation, dangerous stunts, and lifelong resentments shaped the series in ways fans never imagined. For the Robinsons, survival wasn't just about battling alien worlds, it was about enduring Hollywood itself. Decades later, the show still thrives in syndication, reboots, and the memories of fans. Yet the secrets left behind remind us that even beloved classics carry scars. For some cast members, Lost in Space was the role of a lifetime. For others, it was a burden they could never escape. But what do you think? Do these hidden truths change how you see the Robinson family's adventures? Or do they make the show even more fascinating, knowing what the cast endured? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You're watching Icon Legends, where we reveal the untold stories behind Hollywood's most unforgettable shows.